Good morning, gamers. I've rested, I've done some exercises, and I am ready now to talk to you a little bit about the brand new Transcendence hero that hits us this week, Lord of Death Azrael. If you haven't seen, he looks pretty exciting, so we're going to bring up his skills right now, and we're going to be breaking him down. Now, if you don't know, my content is normally geared to newer players and mid-game players so that you can get yourselves in a good position with your Idle Heroes account. If you want to see how this hero performs on very, very late game accounts, I'm talking people who have got him to Tree of Origin level 5 with sublimation improvements, there are content creators out there that will cover that kind of content. I personally find that a little bit unhelpful for most players because the majority of Idle Heroes players aren't at that point, but if that curiosity does get the better of you, do check out other content creators out there, including Rake. And I think we've got some people streaming on Twitch now for Idle Heroes, not just me, so definitely check out the Idle Heroes Twitch category to see who is out live on there. Either way, let's break down Lord of Death Azrael, bearing in mind I will keep that how is he going to function for mid-game players mindset in my head whilst I review him. And of course, if you want to see what he's like in action, we will be trying him out on an assassin account to see how he performs with a very fundamental early/mid-game assassin account, just to see if he's actually worth it or whether you should wait until later on to build him. So let's get things covered, hit the subscribe button for future content, and let's go. So we're going to start with the passives. His basic attack is 220% of attack damage to one enemy with the lowest HP, and it will gain him more damage for each layer of Curse of Doomsday that he has. Now this skill, when you upgrade him through the imprint level, becomes 280%, and when you finally do decide to upgrade him in the tree, that goes even further and becomes 320. So there is scaling to this skill beyond what you see here, and it will do further damage. And that damage compounds, right? The more levels of Curse of Decay you have, the more additional bonuses you get. So that's good. So Curse of Decay is something we need to look out for, as that's going to improve the damage he does. So we've got to be thinking, how does he get this? Moving across, we have Breath of Death. Whenever a hero dies except himself, and this is really cool, he's going to gain one layer of Curse of Decay, and that's whenever any hero dies. So on your team or on the opponent's. So things that should be jumping out to you immediately is running him with lower level heroes that offer death bonuses, such as 9-star Ignis, maybe 9-star Waldeck, heck, even Destroyer. I know people use similar strategies to this in things like Star Expedition, or even just in the early game, because it's effective to use heroes that don't require a lot of investment but do good stuff when they die on your team, because you can focus on the other heroes you're using, which in many cases is someone like a Waldeck or an Eloise, or maybe the first Transcendence hero is who you're pushing. Either way, running lower level heroes to die and give bonuses is not unusual, so it's cool that Lord of Death Azrael gets a layer of Curse of Doomsday when that happens. Also, he's going to remove a debuff from himself, so if he's got attack steal from an enemy ticks, or maybe you've been debuffed in some other way, he will remove that debuff and purify himself, which is actually really, really helpful that that's happening when any hero dies, so it doesn't matter if it's your team or the opponent's. If any enemy dies, specifically an enemy, he's going to gain 20 energy. That's really cool. It's similar to Faithblade, gets some energy gain there. It's also worth noting that this also goes up. It's 30 energy when it's upgraded in the imprint level, and goes even further to be 50 energy when he's Sublime. And one thing you will notice, especially with what DH Games are doing with hero designs now, is they really want to backload them into the sublimation tree, because it encourages people to invest in Tree of Origin skills. And that's why you'll find that heroes like Vesa are more front-loaded, because they were designed before the Tree of Origin exists, but it does seem that heroes like Lord of Death Azrael are designed to work with their tree sublimation upgrades. You can notice when we go later on and look at all these different nodes, they are all good, rather than other heroes who have quite redundant nodes on their trees, which can be a bit disappointing. So it's cool that he gets good stuff. Either way, let's carry on. So he'll gain extra energy, and if an ally dies, this is really nice, he is going to gain speed and holy damage, and the holy damage bonus is 30% for 2 rounds. And of course, as you'd expect, as you take this higher through the tree or the imprint levels, this only gets higher. Let's move on to the final passive, and this is where the magic happens. So when he dies, he becomes a Phantom Remnant for 4 rounds. After that ends, he comes back and revives himself. So really, really neat. And if you have a look here, during the existence of the Phantom Remnant and at the end of each round, so that's when he transforms and at the end of every round following, he will deal 400% of attack damage that ignores armor to all enemies, and additional damage, which caps according to his attack, which will be equal to 8% of the target's max HP, and then he does a further debuff to that opponent, reducing their healing by 30%. Of course, when you take this up in imprints, that's only going to get better. The damage becomes 600%, and the damage that is equivalent to their max HP is 10%, and the healing effect debuff is 50%. And take this up in the tree, the healing debuff remains at 50%, but the max HP damage is 12%, and the armor ignoring damage is 900% of attack. So that's huge damage over time that you have to go ahead and deal with. It's lovely to see him doing really good stuff when he dies. Of course, that should jump out to you that running him alongside a team that will also die means you lose the fight. So you're going to need a hero that locks in as an anchor, whether it's a non-transcendence hero like an Eloise who can stay alive and heal, or whether it's someone who can keep everyone alive like Freya, who gives defenses to the team, or maybe a Vesa who gains shields and heals. You need someone to lock in whilst Lord of Death Azrael is doing this damage to opponents. One really nice thing that stands him out from other assassins is that this is all enemies. A lot of assassins will target lowest HP enemies, and you know, we saw that with his basic attack, it targets the enemy with the lowest HP and does additional damage, but the fact that he has this passive damage which hits everybody just takes him that little bit further than what you'd expect from other assassins. However, for this to trigger, he does need to die. On top of all that, every time a hero is killed, the countdown until he revives is reduced by 1 round. So similar to carry. And this is really cool. This is on both sides of the battlefield. So you'll notice with his normal form, it specifically says whenever an enemy dies. In the case of his Lord of Death Transcendence form, this is when any enemy dies. So more synergy with teammates dying as well. If the Phantom Remnant damage or his active skill, Soul Castigation, manages to kill an enemy, Lord of Death Azrael will instantly be revived with 100% of HP and 100 energy at the beginning of the next round, and then gains a layer of Curse of Doomsday. So it's really important to note that he is coming back just like Carry would, with full energy and full health. So this is a really, really powerful way that he can then swing into his active skill, Advent of Doom. And this is a really, really nice ability. So Advent of Doom deals 1500% of attack damage to himself, and then every layer of Curse of Doomsday means he deals even more damage to himself, and then he inflicts Soul Castigation to 2 enemies with the lowest HP. And the way Soul Castigation works is it deals damage to the target equal to the amount of damage that he dealt to himself through the active skill. It does not crit, and the damage is fixed and is unable to be reduced or increased by attributes and skill effects. So damage reduction won't really stop this. His own damage reduction won't really stop this. There's a lot of different things that you can't really boost it up too much, but basically what it's saying, it's like a fixed amount of damage to the opponent based on the damage he deals to himself. One really nice thing about this is it just scales ridiculously. So if you go to imprints, what was 1500% becomes 1800%, and then you take this up even further, it's 2000% of damage. And also, if we take a look at the nodes real quick, you'll see that Soul Castigation doesn't do 100% of the damage. If you upgrade it, it becomes 110, so you're getting a 10% damage bonus to the Soul Castigation skill, which basically means he's just dealing even more damage to the opponent than what he dealt to himself. In addition, he'll then deal 608% of attack damage to 2 enemies with the lowest HP. So he's targeting 2 enemies on the lowest HP. Very typical assassin style strategies here. And then he'll do on top of that further damage equal to 15% of the target's lost health. So depending on how much they've lost, you'll do more or less. And then there's a 100% chance that on top of that, he's going to give himself Curse of Doomsday. And if you remember, Curse of Doomsday is going to improve his abilities. And actually, it triggers also when he dies. He uses the Curse of Doomsday and deals a whopping 1000% of attack damage to all enemies. It's huge. And then one more layer will deal a further 600% of damage 1 time, up to 3 times. So you can have up to 3 additional layer damage bonuses from that. Wild. He's doing a ton of damage from this, and that doesn't get improved, unfortunately, when you take the active skill higher. It's just the numbers that you see above. But if you look, that's 25% of the target's lost HP, so it gets higher and higher and higher depending on how you improve this guy. But overall, how should you think about using all these skills together? Well, the first thing that should jump out immediately with Lord of Death Azrael is his key ability is his ability to damage himself, deal a lot of damage to the enemies with the lowest HP, And then finally, he wants to die, which will then trigger Curse of Doomsday. It will trigger all the Phantom Remnant damage, and that will just stack up to be a lot of oppressive damage very quickly to the opponent when he dies. If that manages to kill someone, he's then going to resurrect himself back and then do further Advent of Doom active skills, which will then hopefully snowball, rinse and repeat. He'll keep on doing this over and over again. The fact he's dying can potentially synergize with other heroes' Core of Origins as well. For example, I think, if I remember right, Star Alchemist Holmes Young, his Core of Origin actually does something when heroes dies. And funnily enough, if you go and take a look at Lord of Death Azrael's core, which is what we're going to do right now, you'll see that this also has a similar thing. When an ally dies, so I don't think that includes him, it's going to damage 2 random enemies based on the dead ally's attack and grants the distant blessing for all surviving allies. And that's a really nice bonus, giving holy damage, control immunity, and speed, and is stackable up to 6 times. So he's giving himself and his allies speed bonuses, control immunity bonuses, holy damage, really nice abilities that come in here. Is this core phenomenal? Not really. It's just a nice little ability that can stack nicely if you run a team that's revolved around people dying. And this could be instrumental in things like Interdimensional Arena, where running weaker heroes is still a viable strategy. Mid-game players, as I said earlier, it's definitely something that you want to go ahead and do. Run lower HP heroes on your team so that you don't have to over-invest in your heroes. And yeah, it just seems like a really interesting hero. The only thing I'm concerned about is the fact how he functions and plays, as I said earlier, is not really conducive to him being a solo hero. So he might not be a good first Transcendence hero unless you can really anchor in on an Eloise. Also, as I mentioned, his sublimation tree is when stuff really starts to get exciting, so he may be more of a late game hero once you've managed to establish your tree of origin and sublimation bonuses. Unfortunately, a lot of this is hidden behind paywalls, so free-to-play players will not be getting the most out of their Lord of Death Azrael. The first 2 tree upgrades are more focused around damage, and the last 2 are focused around buffing the team, similar to how Rogan does. So let's take a look at these. You'll see first, he gets all damage dealt increased by 12%. Phenomenal. It's going to further his damage everywhere. He's going to deal an extra 600% of attack damage to 2 enemies with the lowest HP when he does this active skill, which is awesome. And a crit is guaranteed. That's nuts. Just guaranteed crit is really strong. And as we've already seen, he's going to do an extra 10% damage from his soul castigation rather than the normal 100% you'd expect. So these are pretty good sublimations on his active skill. Not to mention the active skill also gets really, really powerful when you upgrade this. Next, if we look at the noble sublimation, this talks about his basic attack. And on the first stage of damage to the enemy, the target's all damage received is increased by 10% for 2 rounds, and their effect of being healed is reduced by 25%. That will stack with the additional 50% healing reduction he already does, so he can potentially dish out 75% healing reduction if he gets a basic attack and then follows that up with his death passive. So that's a really interesting ability to have there. But the fact that he also improves that all damage received on the opponent, that's actually really strong and synergizes with big damage dealers like Vesa, so I love to see that. He gets a 10% crit bonus, and his Annihilating Reaper ability ignores armor. So one big problem with assassins is, if you see with Sword Flash, she really loves to synergize with Drake because it helps her abilities push through. And yes, the active skill has lots of armor ignoring components, but not all of it does. And to get the most damage, it's always great to run a Drake and a Rogan. In the case of Lord of Death Azrael, he has lots of bits that also ignore armor, so it's great that these exist, and getting that full, right, his whole basic attack is going to ignore armor on his abilities is a really solid ability to get given to him. Further to that, let's see how the Breath of Death gets improved. So the pure sublimation improves his HP and attack. The deep sublimation reads, if an ally dies, he'll additionally reduce all enemies' crit damage by 40% for 2 rounds. So this is phenomenal. More stuff leaning into that strategy of wanting your own team to die. So as I already mentioned, you know, this is jumping out to heroes like 9-star Ignises, Waldex, Destroyers, heroes that you want to die in things like Star Expedition, or even in some crazy, you know, lineups that may actually be able to abuse this ability quite nicely. Also, punishing the opponent so their crit damage is lowered is going to massively add to your survivability. Not to mention you're wrecking the opponent's survivability by reducing their effect of being healed. So Azrael seems like a bit of a breaker hero. He's doing support to keep you alive. He's dealing good damage against the lowest HP enemies. He's got death passive damage, and he resurrects himself, which means he's quite hard to remove. So yeah, he's just doing a lot of good things. So really love to see this. And that's a huge damage reduction, by the way. And if 2 allies die, that's going to stack. So potentially if a load of people die, your enemy just might do no crit damage whatsoever, which is just an incredible ability to have. And then finally, if an enemy dies, he's going to increase all allies' attack by 10%. Right? There's no, for 2 rounds, 3 rounds, none of that. It's just have 10% extra attack, period, when an enemy dies. So you'll get rewarded for killing opponents. This is just a beautiful thing to do. And you can potentially punish enemies for running things like carry, or maybe even their own Lord of Death Azrael. Because you kill them, they resurrect, you can kill them again, and it's just going to trigger this multiple times, and it just stacks up your damage. So yeah, that 10% attack bonus is just really neat to see. And the final passive, things get really, really silly here. So take a look at this. Obviously, he's going to get his normal HP and attack bonus, but if you look at this, during the existence of Phantom Remnant, and at the end of every round, he's going to reduce the all damage dealt by 1 enemy with the highest attack. So he's going to debuff the all damage dealt by your opponent's key damaging hero. And that can be really instrumental in stealing you a win, because debuffing the highest attacker can potentially stop a Garuda from blowing you out. Or even PvP, it could stop your opponent's Fairy Queen Vessa, or the hero that they focused all their upgrades in. So that's really great to see. And then Noble Sublimation, during the existence of Phantom Remnant, he's going to get, at the end of each round, a bonus of 50 energy to 1 random ally. Now, yes, this is inconsistent, but any form of energy feed is wild. So I'm looking at this hero. He feeds energy. He debuffs opponents. He reduces the opponent's healing effect. He's going to buff your entire team with attack bonuses and damage bonuses. He's going to increase the damage opponents takes. He's also going to resurrect himself. He's going to deal a ton of damage to himself, which then echoes back onto the opponent. He's doing a ton of things. The question still raises, though, is he going to be good? And I don't think we can actually say just from reading these skills, because a lot of heroes do bring some good damage to the table. And what I see right here is a hero that's doing a lot, but also you have to bear in mind what he's bringing to the table is counteracted by the fact he will kill himself, which is helping your opponent's win condition, because you dying and having no heroes left alive equals game over. So you really need to think about running him with a team that can stay alive and anchor in. We may see strategies where people build Eloise as their first E5 and run the usual stuff there. I mean, there's going to be a carry there as well, which will synergize with his death passive. You're going to see Tixes that come in here, which will synergize with allies dying. Like, all these heroes that already naturally build into Eloise potentially will synergize with Lord of Death Azrael. The question still raises, though, is running a hero that plays into that strategy the way Lord of Death Azrael does a good idea? Now, for Seal Land Shadow, definitely, because you've got to bear in mind he's a shadow hero, so this will help you in Seal Land Shadow. So there could be an argument that in the early game, building him as a first Transcendence hero is a really good strat alongside an Eloise. However, what you have to bear in mind, though, is by building him as your first Transcendence hero, you are not building Vessa as your first Transcendence hero. And even though he plays into a lot of the good strategies that an early Eloise team might be trying to do, you are sacrificing the opportunity to build a Vessa who is good at the things Eloise is bad at, such as Broken Spaces, Star Expedition, and various high damage dealing game modes where Vessa is able to pop off and Eloise would otherwise be a little bit stubborn and not really push that far ahead. So do bear in mind that by choosing to build a Vessa, you are allowing yourself to be able to do additional things, whereas it seems Azrael plays into a pre-existing Eloise strategy. However, it may become apparent that building an Azrael alongside an Eloise allows you to do those things that Eloise already normally struggles with, because you just add that much more power to the team. And there is the argument that by being able to push further in Seal Land, it's just benefiting the account even further, and it means you don't have to worry too much about making a Homo Najara to push ahead in Seal Land that way. One other final point before we go is actually his tenants. Azrael has some really interesting tenants that play into this strategy even further. We have Eloise, a hero that you should be building in the Eloise strategy anyway. We have Annabelle, which is not too hard to go ahead and build. Also, she is a hero that's used on tons of heroes as a tenant. So scrolling through, you'll see, look, she's on Eos, she's on Freya, she's on Jara, and yeah, she's also on Azrael. So Annabelle gets around. She is a pretty big old tenant. Let's just say she visits a lot of houses. That's probably the best way we can say this one. And Holmes Young in tenant spot 3, lovely, fantastic hero that I would definitely encourage people to build, and this is more so a reason to. And then finally, Mystic Fairy Freya, one of my favorite Transcendence heroes, gets in on tenant spot 4. So there are some arguments here for a way that you could build towards Azrael early on, but it remains to be seen as whether that strategy is going to be superior to the pre-existing strategies we've got. My guess is it won't be, but it would still be cool and viable. But obviously, running Vesa is more reliable, it's further researched, and people have had time to go and investigate and invest in that. Azrael is still very new as a Transcendence hero. Less than 24 hours ago, he was added to the game, so we still have a lot of time to research and discover if early game he is going to be worthy as an investment. It does seem, though, that if you look at his Tree of Origin upgrades and his Sublimation, the bonuses that he has will definitely lean towards late game players who are adding to a pre-established team with already a good number of Transcendence heroes, and Azrael can just further complement that team by debuffing the opponents, buffing up your team, and playing into a strategy where hopefully Azrael will shine, and that potentially could give him viable use in the Void campaign. All that remains to be seen, though. So if you want to go see how a Tree of Origin 5 Max Sublimation Azrael is performing, go ahead and check out some other content creators out there. It's potentially a good idea that if you were going to build him, I'd probably build him as a second Tree of Origin level 5 hero to go alongside an already really good one. So let's say you had a Mockman and an Azrael, that would be ridiculous. Or maybe like a Vesa and an Azrael, or a Jara and an Azrael, definitely would complement together. We'll potentially be seeing Jara plus Azrael being able to very easily handle CLN 30, the two of them together, especially when you add in the Tree of Origin upgrades. So there's a lot of routes you can take with Azrael for later game players, but for the majority of players out there who are newer to the game or haven't got that kind of spending behind them, you'll probably think of him as an interesting addition, but not compulsory, which is always good for the release of a hero, I think. I think it's a healthy way to bring in a new Transcendence hero, but he is, of course, the first Transcendence hero that can revive, and that could potentially change his standings and make him an interesting choice for many of you at home. Bear in mind, he doesn't CC, so still looking at heroes like Jara for that kind of strat, and with the lack of healing and support that he gives your team from a more holistic standpoint, I still lean towards Vesa and Freya for those behaviors, and I doubt he's going to be able to outdamage Vesa because her damage is truly insane. Either way, folks, I'll see you in the next one. Let me know what you think about Lord of Death Azrael, and for further information about him on early and mid-game teams, hit the subscribe button because we will be checking him out this afternoon on Twitch, and that will eventually come here onto YouTube. See you in the next one, guys. Happy island.